there is a quiet unrest that inhabits the attentive hearts. An almost ancestral sensation, as if something fundamental is missing from the official narrative that has been given to us about the history of mankind. This is not mere intellectual curiosity, but a subtle call, an inner spark that whispers to those seeking more than just answers. What is sought is a lost memory. Those who have looked at the night sky feeling that existence holds secrets buried under the sands of time know that there are dormant memories waiting for the right moment to emerge. And it is in this fertile ground of questioning that the enigma of the children of light arises, an order shrouded in silence, that predates the era of Christ and that claimed to be the guardian of a grand mission long before the name Jesus was spoken with reverence by the world. Little is spoken about this forgotten fraternity, as it does not appear in the common history books, nor is it discussed in religious pulpits. Its legacy hides like an invisible thread among the records of ancient prophets and the murmurs of initiates who lived in seclusion, far from cities corrupted by the thirst for power. The children of light did not seek fame, influence, or dominion over men. Their mission was much more profound and delicate, to prepare the earth for a cosmic event, the advent of a Christ consciousness that would come to renew the spiritual foundations of humanity. They did not preach an external savior, but a transformation that should occur at the core of each being, guided by a light that transcends time, space, and dogma. The exact origin of this fraternity is lost in the traces of the ages, but some scholars connect it to lineages even older than the Essenes, whose existence already represented a mystery to the traditional Hebrew world. It is spoken of a spiritual lineage that silently emerged between the 4th and 2nd centuries BC in territories close to the Dead Sea, where the desert seemed to be the ideal setting for a type of wisdom that demanded solitude, contemplation, and constant purification. There, under the burning sky and in protected caves, these men and women practiced a lifestyle that broke with the conventions of their time. They fasted, meditated, studied ancient scriptures, observed the stars, and waited. They waited for a sign. But what exactly were they expecting? And how did they know that something or someone would come? Here the enigma deepens. The fragmented and obscure texts attributed to this order reveal that they understood human history not as an evolutionary chance, but as part of a cycle of revelations. They believed that time, far from being linear, obeyed cosmic pulsations in which certain truths needed to be sown at specific times. Each generation would only receive what it was ready to embrace. And according to this view, a new cycle was approaching. An enlightened presence would descend to earth, bringing with it not a new religion, but a renewal of human consciousness itself. They did not yet know the name Jesus, but they recognized the vibration of what he would represent. It's impossible to ignore the magnetism that this order still exerts on those who, today, feel alien in the modern world. Many who discover this history see themselves reflected in the teachings attributed to the children of light. This is because their language was not made up only of words, but of spiritual frequency. Their actions were silent, yet potent, like a prayer that echoes in the invisible and acts behind the scenes of reality. And perhaps that's why, even after centuries of oblivion, we still talk about them. Not because history has rescued them, but because their internal echoes have never faded from the human soul. They continue to call us from within, awakening memories that don't come from books, but from the very essence. The unknown order did not have stone temples or political hierarchies. Their temple was the purified body, their hierarchy was humility before the mystery. They did not worship images, they did not seek intermediaries. Their rites were aimed at tuning with what they called the living source, a subtle and ineffable presence that filled all things. They considered life as a great spiritual preparation, and suffering as part of a soul's training to receive the light without disintegrating. Nothing was by chance. Pain, silence, solitude, everything was raw material for inner transmutation. The initiatory tests they underwent did not involve external demonstrations of faith, but deep internal crossings. For years, they could live in total seclusion, merely observing the sky, meditating on ancient words, and working the land with their hands. They believed that humble service was the greatest path to freeing oneself from the ego. And so they prepared, like gardeners cultivating sacred soil to receive a divine seed. They were the ones who came before the dawn, announcing with their silent existence that something glorious was approaching. The legacy of the Children of Light is also a silent indictment against the spiritual superficiality that has dominated many practices over the centuries. They were not deceived by dogmas, nor by external miracles. They knew that the real miracle was the awakening of consciousness, the radical transformation of the self. For them, faith was not blind belief, but direct experience with the sacred, a state of constant attunement with the invisible laws of the universe. And it is precisely this that connects them to the mission of Christ, not as a religious event, but as a turning point in the earth's vibration. Within the oral tradition that circulated among the initiates, it was said that when the time came, many would not recognize the presence of the emissary. This was because they were expecting a king with crowns and swords, not a being of radical humility and unconditional love. The Children of Light knew that the manifestation would come in a discreet manner, camouflaged among men, teaching through parables and living as an example. And this is exactly how Christ presented himself, not imposing, but serving, not punishing, but healing. The members of the order would have understood his presence immediately, for they were trained to recognize the frequency, not the form. Perhaps the most striking realization is that the Children of Light did not only operate in the Middle East. There are indications, albeit fragmented, that their seeds were sown in various regions, from ancient Ethiopia to Egypt, from Greece to the high Himalayas. They were not seeking to establish institutions, but to inspire consciousness. They were like bearers of an invisible torch, which ignited hearts and then disappeared into the mists of time. Their mission was to plant, not to reap, to prepare, not to star. Today, in a world filled with noise, there are those who feel this call again. It doesn't come in words, but in internal pulses, a feeling that the time is ripe for a new awakening. And perhaps, as in the past, a new fraternity is being formed, no longer secret, but silent, no longer isolated, but awake. Those who feel the call know that it is not rational. It touches a memory that goes beyond this life. And it is in this intimate recognition that we retrace the steps of the Children of Light. This first unveiling of the veil is just the beginning. To truly understand who these beings were and what their relationship was with the coming of Christ, we need to delve even deeper. We need to go to the desert, where silence speaks and where ancient echoes still vibrate. Because it was there that the story began to be written by invisible hands, guided by the light. In the midst of the desert, where the wind whispers among millennial stones and silence echoes with the intensity of a hidden thunder, one of the most enigmatic spiritual manifestations of antiquity blossomed. The Essenes, far beyond just a simple, isolated Jewish sect, represent a profound lineage of seekers who found in the aridity of the wilderness the ideal ground to cultivate the spirit. But what few understand is that behind the historical face of the Essenes existed an older, more discreet and even higher structure in its spiritual mission, the Sons of Light. The connection between these two manifestations is not only probable, it is vital to deciphering the silent journey that prepared the way for the Christic presence on earth. The Essenes were, in many ways, the visible body of an invisible spirit, and this spirit answered to the hidden name of Brotherhood of Light. Historical records about the Essenes are scarce and fragmented, but consistent in certain aspects. They lived away from cities, practiced regular fasting, adopted a communal lifestyle, rejected the accumulation of possessions, and sought incessantly for the purity of body, mind, and heart. Their days were marked by strict discipline, moments of contemplative silence, and practices aimed at aligning the human being with the superior forces of the cosmos. However, these practices did not arise by chance. They were inherited from even older traditions, orally transmitted by initiates who preserved the living flame of knowledge that predated Israel itself. The Sons of Light would therefore be the hidden precursors of all this manifestation, the invisible root of a tree that the world only partially perceived. The spiritual structure of the Essenes was refined and intricate, divided into initiatory degrees. They did not allow just anyone to simply join the group. There were tests, silent observations, and long periods of integration before someone was truly considered one of them. This same structure is pointed out in fragments of Dead Sea texts, where a community that saw itself as the chosen ones, the righteous, those who walk in the light of righteousness is mentioned. The parallel with the sons of light is inevitable, especially when it is understood that these texts speak not of an ethnic people, but of a spiritual brotherhood, transcending blood, tribe, or nation. They saw themselves as part of a cosmic mission spanning millennia. The desert where the Essenes settled was not just a geographical refuge, but a powerful symbol of purification. The wilderness represented the absence of distractions, the sacred solitude that forced the initiate to confront their own inner demons and eventually find the divine spark hidden beneath the layers of personality. There, far from the centers of religious and political power, they could hear the voice of the source without the interference of human structures. This choice was not out of fear, but for spiritual strategy. They knew that the external world was corrupted by vanities, and only in isolation could they preserve the necessary clarity to fulfill their mission. The Essenes strictly observed natural cycles. Their practices were in tune with the movements of the stars, lunar phases, and solstices. This synchronicity with nature revealed a sophisticated understanding of universal laws, something that goes beyond cultural rituals. It is a recognition that true spirituality is connected to the forces that govern the cosmos itself. They understood that everything was interconnected, and that every gesture, every thought, every intention reverberated on multiple planes of existence. This level of consciousness could not have emerged suddenly. It was the ripe fruit of an ancestral tree whose roots were lost in the mists of time, nourished by the teachings of the Sons of Light. There are scholars who assert that the Essenes could have been merely a regional branch of a broader fraternity, spread in small clusters throughout various parts of the East. This hypothesis gains strength when one observes the similarity of their practices with other initiatory schools in Egypt, Persia, and ancient India. Celibacy, meditation, fasting, and the use of sacred herbs were not exclusive to the Essenes, but trademarks of a universal knowledge transmitted by lineages who knew that the human body was a living temple, and that the soul needed to be refined like gold in the flames of self-knowledge. The Sons of Light would have been, therefore, the catalysts of this large initiatory network, operating in the shadows but influencing hearts and minds in various corners of the ancient world. The accounts attributed to Pliny the Elder, Flavius Josephus, and Philo of Alexandria about the Essenes reveal an almost reverent astonishment at the conduct of these men and women. They lived as if the outside world did not belong to them, as if they were anchored in a parallel reality, governed by other principles. This was, in fact, a direct reflection of their spiritual training, inherited from the Order of the Sons of Light. This preparation aimed at a very specific goal: to keep the Earth's vibration high enough so that, when the appointed time came, the Christ presence could incarnate in a human body without being torn apart by the density of the world. The Essenes, just like their unseen predecessors, knew they were preparing something much larger than themselves. They did not seek immediate results, nor human recognition. Their faith was, above all, a commitment to the invisible. They believed that everything they did in the microcosm reverberated in the macrocosm, and that their silent prayers helped sustain the spiritual balance of the world. They saw themselves as bridges between worlds, as instruments of a higher intelligence that operated through absolute surrender. And it is at this point that the children of light and the Essenes merge in essence. Both served the same cause, the same light, the same cosmic Christ who had not yet fully manifested in history. It is impossible to comprehend the magnitude of the Christian mission without understanding the silent foundations that were carefully constructed by these brotherhoods. The birth of Jesus in Bethlehem was not a coincidence, nor an isolated event. It was the culmination of a spiritual work that spanned centuries, carried out by beings who renounced everything to become pure channels of a higher revelation. The Essenes prepared the ground, but it was the Sons of Light who sowed the first seed, long before the dawn of this new era. And it is on this sacred soil that the rest of this narrative will unfold, where prophecy meets time, and where the invisible begins to take shape before watchful eyes. In the quietude of the desert, among the stones worn by time, the gentle chants of men and women who devoted their lives to the light still echo. This light was not a metaphor. It was a presence, a living intelligence, a vibration they learned to recognize, absorb, and transmit. With each sunrise, they gathered in silence, their faces turned eastward, not in worship of a star, but in reverence to what it symbolized, the daily rebirth of light within the being. And so, day after day, decade after decade, generation after generation, they kept the flame lit that would one day fully incarnate in the figure of Christ. The desert was their home, their altar, their mirror, and even today, those who quiet themselves enough can hear them, not with the ears of the body, but with the ears of the soul, because the Essenes have passed, but the children of light have never left. They simply changed in form, in name, in time. And perhaps at this very moment, they are among us again, invisible, discreet, silent, preparing once again the path for a new birth of consciousness. Long before the Gospels were written and disseminated, long before the name Jesus echoed among the peoples, there were enigmatic records, veiled prophecies, and ancestral symbols pointing to the coming of a figure who would radically transform the structure of human consciousness. This figure, although still faceless and without a defined name, was awaited by those who knew the cycles of time and the codes of the invisible. For the children of light, the arrival of the Messiah was not just a religious or political event, as many expected within the Jewish tradition. It was a cosmic event, a turning point in the flow of reality, the moment when the divine would penetrate the world directly, not as an idea, but as a living incarnation of the primordial light itself. The prophecy, for them, was not a prediction, but a remembrance of the inevitable. In the caves bordering the Dead Sea, scrolls found centuries later would reveal to the world part of this long-hidden secret. Among these texts, the so-called War Scroll of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness describes with vivid symbolism a spiritual battle that was not confined to earthly armies, but represented an inner confrontation between opposing forces of existence. The words used are dense, laden with codes, and many of them refer to the arrival of an anointed one, a spiritual leader who would not dominate by the sword, but by the word and vibration. Conventional scholars have debated for decades the meaning of these writings, but for the initiates, there is no doubt. It is a symbolic announcement of the Christic mission, written before the world was ready to understand it. The language of these texts is not accessible to common understanding. Filled with layers and metaphors, their true comprehension requires a mind trained in the hermetic keys of the Spirit. This is because the children of light did not leave explicit information to chance. They knew that truth, when given to an unprepared heart, can become poison instead of medicine. Therefore, their prophecies were encrypted in sacred poetry, transmitted in fragments, veiled by universal symbols and ancestral archetypes. In them, the Messiah is not just a man. He is described as the bearer of the eternal wisdom, the one who will reveal the mystery kept since the beginning of time. His role would not be to found a religion, but to remind humanity of its true origin, not as bodies limited to flesh, but as conscious extensions of the source. It is crucial to understand that the messianic vision of the Sons of Light did not coincide with the prevailing popular expectation among the Jews of that time. While many awaited a liberating warrior who would restore Israel to power and expel the Roman rulers, this fraternity awaited something far more subtle and transformative, an incarnated consciousness that would open internal portals in the human being. This distinction is essential to understand why, even in the face of miracles and profound teachings, the majority did not recognize the Christ presence when it manifested. Only those who had already cleansed the eyes of the soul could see what for others seemed just another prophet among so many. The preparation to see the Messiah was more important than the manifestation of the Messiah himself. The children of light understood that the Messiah would bring not a new moral code, but a new vibrational field. His body would be the vehicle of a consciousness unprecedented in known history. His mission would not be to convince, but to radiate. His speech would not be just instruction, but activation. And those who were in tune with this frequency would recognize him immediately, even if he did not say a single word. For them, the revelation of Christ was a direct consequence of the maturation of a planetary spiritual cycle. Just as a flower only blooms when the soil, climate, and time are in harmony, the Messiah could only arise when the earth was sufficiently prepared to receive him, not geographically, but spiritually. The centuries of silent work by the fraternity had this purpose: to adjust the field of humanity to withstand the vibrational presence of Christ. Some prophecies present in the Essene and Pre-Essene texts, attributed to a mysterious master of righteousness, speak of a time when darkness would dominate hearts, but that amidst this dense night, an unquenchable light would arise. This master, who many believe to be a figure predating Jesus, perhaps a precursor or avatar from the same lineage of consciousness, would pave the way for what was to come. He taught in secret, formed silent disciples, revealed spiritual codes with symbolic language. His role was to lay the groundwork, like a plow preparing the soil before the arrival of the sacred seed. Some say that this master of righteousness was, in fact, one of the previous incarnations of the same Christ consciousness that would later manifest as Jesus of Nazareth. What makes this perspective so powerful is the understanding that Christ is not an isolated individual, but an archetypal force that cyclically manifests at pivotal moments in history. The children of light knew this and structured their lives around this cycle. Yes, they awaited a Messiah, but not an external savior who would solve human problems by divine decree. They awaited a catalyst, a being whose presence would activate the latent codes of the collective soul, a living mirror that would reveal to the human being what he has always been, but forgot. This is the true essence of prophecy, not to point out an event, but to recall an origin, not to announce the future, but to awaken the eternal. This profound reading of the scriptures radically contrasts with the way sacred texts were later interpreted by religious institutions. What was symbolic was taken as literal. What was cosmic was reduced to political. What was internal was projected to the external, and thus the Messiah was transformed from mirror to idol, from presence to doctrine, from activator to savior. The children of light did not worship images, did not build temples, did not create hierarchies. For them, revelation was direct, alive, pulsating. Each being was a temple, each life an opportunity for divine manifestation. Therefore, their prophecies did not seek to control, but to liberate. They did not dictate rules, but offered maps for the return to the origin. Another recurring prophecy in their texts referred to an end time, which wouldn't be the end of the physical world, but the closure of a cycle of ignorance. This time would be marked by external chaos, moral degradation, and spiritual forgetfulness. However, amid this gloomy scenario, the light would once again emerge, and it wouldn't only come from outside, but also from within those who were ready. This was the veiled promise. The Messiah would be the first, but not the last. The spark he would ignite wouldn't extinguish with his departure. On the contrary, it would spread, multiply, until each human being became a conscious point of light, a son of light awakened in their own mission. In summary, the children of light understood history as a spiraling flow, where certain patterns repeat at increasingly higher levels of consciousness. The coming of the Messiah was just one of these spirals, a milestone, a beacon indicating a new evolutionary stage for humanity. Their prophecies, therefore, did not end with the birth of Jesus. They continue to echo, calling, waiting for the next ones who will recognize the light not in an external figure, but in their own essence. Christ, for them, was not just a man from the past, but a seed planted in the heart of every sincere seeker. As times progress and the veil between worlds becomes thinner, more and more people start to feel the call of these forgotten prophecies, not because they read it in an old book, but because something within them begins to vibrate in harmony with the eternal truth that these children of light already knew. This truth cannot be proven, only experienced. It cannot be taught, only awakened. And this is exactly what the next stage of this journey will reveal, as we dive into the heart of the silent initiation that prepared the chosen ones to carry this light without being consumed by it. Upon entering the inner circles of the Order of the Sons of Light, the seeker would not find lavish ceremonies, grand titles, or promises of immediate salvation. Instead, they were greeted by the most powerful of all masters, silence. An absolute silence, laden with meaning, which cut through the mind like a blade, stripping bare the ego, revealing illusions, and calling the spirit to a deeper listening. Initiation into this fraternity was not a public ritual or a social rite. It was a slow, demanding, and transformative process that confronted the initiate with all of their masks, inviting them to die to the old self, to finally be reborn as a bearer of the light. On this path, it was not enough to believe. One had to become. The silence was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of listening. The children of light understood that the world is saturated with mental noise, uncontrolled desires, and scattered opinions. Therefore, they trained their initiates to enter a state of inner quietude so profound that they could hear the eternal truths that are not pronounced with words. During the early stages of training, the neophytes spent long periods in observation and contemplation. They were not permitted to speak, nor to ask questions. They learned from the example of the elders, from the gestures, from the rhythms of the day, from the subtle symbols embedded in daily tasks. This is how true knowledge was transmitted, from soul to soul, by resonance. This spiritual pedagogy was based on the understanding that the common mind is not ready to receive higher knowledge. The intellect, no matter how sharp, is only a part of human consciousness. To access the level of wisdom that the Brotherhood preserved, the initiate needed to purify his body, align his emotions, and empty his mind until it became a clear mirror, capable of reflecting light without distortions. This was done through rigorous disciplines: prolonged fasting, night vigils, meditation in sacred places, ritual baths, studies of coded texts, and long periods of guided solitude. Each practice had a function: to dissolve the internal structures that prevented the direct reception of the divine. The hidden knowledge was not concealed out of arrogance or exclusivity, but out of reverence for its power. The children of light knew that certain truths, when revealed to an immature heart, could cause more harm than good. Therefore, they protected these teachings with codes, metaphors, and tests of humility. Only those who persevered, who traversed the desert of the soul, who endured the weight of not knowing, were gradually led to higher spheres of understanding. The mysteries were not handed over as information, but as inner revelations that occurred spontaneously when the initiate reached the corresponding vibrational level. It was an organic process, intimate, non-transferable, and, for that very reason, sacred. At the heart of this teaching was the understanding that the universe is an expanding mind and that each human being is a fragment of this divine mind. The occult knowledge was not a set of facts, but a living language, a sacred code inscribed in the very structure of being. The initiation allowed the adept to decipher this code, awakening dormant abilities, such as deep intuition, energetic reading of the environment, communication with subtle planes, and the perception of the hidden patterns of existence. These gifts were not seen as powers, but as responsibilities. Each new perception brought with it the demand for greater purity, greater service, greater surrender. The initiate did not grow in status, but in silence, in humility, in detachment. The silence, in turn, became increasingly full. As the initiate progressed, he began to understand that many questions have no answer because they were poorly formulated, that many searches are distractions, that the truth is not in finding new information, but in ceasing the interferences that prevent its manifestation. He learned to listen to symbols, to read time, to dialogue with life. Everything became language: the wind, the stars, the cycles, the body, the dreams. Reality ceased to be a set of disconnected events and revealed itself as a living mandala, an infinite network of meanings where nothing was random. This was the point at which the initiate truly began to see with the eyes of the spirit. The texts that have survived to this day and carry fragments of knowledge from the children of light are only shadows of what was really conveyed within the inner circles. They give us hints, they provoke us, but they never reveal the whole picture. And this is intentional, because true knowledge cannot be delivered from outside in. It needs to be generated from within the being, like a spiritual birth. Silence was the matrix where this birth took place, and the initiate, upon being reborn, did not receive a title, but a task: to become a transmitter of light, not through words, but through presence, to be a living reminder that the divine dwells among us. Those who completed the higher levels of initiation rarely returned to ordinary life. Many completely withdrew from social interaction and became guardians of the energy of sacred places. Others were sent on silent missions to assist in critical moments of history. Some assumed humble roles in various communities, living as ordinary people, but radiating wisdom wherever they went. None of them sought recognition because they knew that true light does not need to be announced. It simply transforms. Their purpose was not to found churches, but to keep the invisible thread of truth lit in the world, like an energy current that spans the centuries. The initiation did not end with learning, but with conscious forgetting. When the initiate was ready, they forgot everything they had intellectually learned to become a pure channel. They no longer acted out of knowledge, but by direct intuition. They no longer spoke for themselves, but for the source. This state of complete emptiness was the pinnacle of the journey. And that's why the children of light never left fixed doctrines or organized structures. Their teaching was alive, mutable, adapted to time, place, and being. The only constant was the light, silent, humble, powerful, that permeated everything. The discipline required to reach this state was immense. There were no shortcuts, nor indulgences. Those who were not ready naturally drifted away, as the journey completely stripped them bare. Those who persisted, however, were slowly transformed from the inside out, until the external world ceased to hold any allure. They lived with radical simplicity, with silent gratitude, with anonymous love. And so, they fulfilled their role in the Order's larger mission, to uphold the frequency of truth in a world of illusions. This frequency was the same that would prepare the world for the arrival of Christ, for only silent hearts could recognize him. Only purified minds could understand him, and only initiated beings could walk alongside him, not as followers, but as brothers in the light. This was the silent promise of the Brotherhood, and this promise remains alive, waiting for those who dare to cross the path of initiation again. Throughout the centuries, human understanding of Christ has gradually been impoverished, reduced to dogmatic outlines, trapped in institutional structures, and almost exclusively represented by external and historical narratives. However, for the children of light, Christ was never just a historical figure. They were not waiting for an ordinary man, limited to flesh and chronology. They were preparing the vibrational ground for a cosmic intelligence, a living presence that transcends time and space, and whose essence resonates beyond matter as the direct emanation from the creative source. Christ, for this ancient order, was a universal principle, a divine frequency destined to incarnate at the exact moment when the earth was spiritually fertile. The mission was not only to prepare the birth of a being, but to align the very planetary reality for the arrival of a field of consciousness never seen before. This presence they called the Cosmic Christ was understood as the pure expression of intelligent love, universal order, and supreme harmony. It was not a separate entity, but the personification of the original light that organizes galaxies, pulses in the heart of stars, and silently inhabits the center of each soul. According to the secret writings and indirect testimonies preserved by the initiates, the children of light not only anticipated this arrival, they cultivated it. Their daily work, their purification practices, their silent chants, their night vigils, and their fasts were not acts of penance, but subtle tools to anchor this new frequency in the planet's energy grid. Each action, each intention, each thought was a brick in the construction of a receptive field to the incarnation of the Christ consciousness. They knew that Earth, in its raw state, was still steeped in patterns of selfishness, fear, and separation. They also knew that no pure manifestation could fully descend to this plane without first finding a compatible field to welcome it. Therefore, their mission was twofold: to sustain the memory of this future presence among men, and at the same time to transform internally, so that their own bodies and minds could serve as channels for this energy when it manifested. They saw themselves as living instruments of the great cosmic adjustment that would culminate in the coming of Christ, not as a religious being, but as the collective activation of a new planetary consciousness. Each initiate was trained to become a living antenna, an extension of the light, a conscious particle of the whole. The records that have survived from parallel traditions, such as the Gnostic texts and the Qumran manuscripts, speak in codes of the arrival of one of the righteous, the Son of Truth, he who will not have a father among men, but who will be generated by the light. This terminology reveals the lofty view that the children of light had of the Christic incarnation, a fusion of the spiritual with the material that did not depend solely on blood lineage, but on the maturation of a vibrational field. Christ would not come to create a new religion, but to dissolve the illusions of all of them. His mission would be to reveal the divine hidden within the human being itself, breaking the veils of ignorance and reigniting the memory of the sacred origin of all beings. He would not place himself above men, but would remind them of who they truly are. And it is at this point that the children of light differed radically from later religious traditions. They did not expect to be saved by a Messiah, nor would they create temples or institutions to worship him. Instead, they prepared to recognize him when he came and to reflect his light in silence, without fanfare. Their joy would not be in witnessing miracles or receiving blessings, but in confirming, through the very presence of Christ, that their mission had been fulfilled. The world was ready for a new beginning. They knew that Christ, when he manifested, would awaken not only admiration, but also fear, resistance, and persecution. This is because his light would reveal the darkest shadows, both in the individual and in collective structures. But even so, they were ready. Their preparation was not for applause, but for silent service in the face of the greatest evolutionary movement of humanity. For them, Christ was like the spiritual sun of the universe, an emanation that, upon touching the earth, would awaken the purest and also the darkest within each being. His presence would not be comfortable, but transformative. It wouldn't bring immediate external peace, but intense purification. That's why the children of light had prepared to maintain the balance during this critical moment. They were the invisible guardians of the transition. Their rituals, often misunderstood by external observers, were subtle operations to keep the planetary vibration high enough so that the impact of the Christic presence wouldn't cause irreversible collapses in the Earth's energetic fabric. They were literally the invisible workers of the collective awakening. In the oral records that have survived among the descendants of these lineages, there are clear mentions that Christ, upon being born, would not be alone. He would have around him men and women who would recognize his light without the need for proof. They would not be priests or leaders, but silent siblings, already prepared, who would understand him with a glance and with the heart. These would not be mere followers, but extensions of his mission, anchoring points for his vibration in various regions. The mission of the cosmic Christ was collective, and the children of light were ready to spread his presence across multiple centers, supporting the network of the new consciousness, even without ever claiming any credit for it. They were servants of the invisible, lovers of the sacred, builders of the future. This Christ they were waiting for would not come solely to forgive sins or perform physical healings. He would be the transmitter of a new life code, of a new vibrational matrix that would allow humans to remember that they are more than body, more than mind, more than history. He would bring the living memory of unity, dissolving the borders between self and others, between time and eternity, between heaven and earth, and this memory, once ignited, could never be extinguished. The children of light knew this, and that's why they never held back in supporting this call, even if it cost them anonymity, exile, or their very lives. They understood that they were serving something immeasurably greater than themselves, the awakening of the planet itself as a conscious entity. In his most secret writings, there was the notion that the Christic mission would unfold in 3 waves. The first would be the physical incarnation, the coming of the Master as one among men. The second would be the activation of consciousness in prepared hearts, forming an invisible field of beings aligned with the inner Christ. And the third, predicted for future ages, would be the full manifestation of this consciousness on a planetary scale, when the planet itself would vibrate in resonance with the Christic frequency. The children of light dedicated themselves to the first and second. The third still resides in the future, but its ground is already being prepared by those who, like them, listen to the inner call and are willing to live as bearers of light in a world still immersed in shadow. The crystal clear mission of the children of light did not end with the arrival of Christ. On the contrary, it intensified. They began to operate in even greater silence, now as guardians of the living teaching, as discreet witnesses to the internal revolution that the Master had initiated. Some accompanied him in life, others remained hidden, supporting his work behind the scenes, but all, without exception, recognized that the light they had waited for centuries had finally touched the earth. And with that, a new cycle began, not of worship, but of incorporation, not of words, but of presence. Christ now dwelled among men, and the fraternity that had anticipated him would continue its mission, now in new forms, preparing those who would come later to recognize this light within themselves. Among the many mysteries surrounding the life of Jesus of Nazareth, few are as intriguing as the hidden years of his youth, that period between his childhood reported in the Gospels and the beginning of his public mission. The gap of almost 2 decades remains shrouded in silence, overlooked by formal traditions and only briefly mentioned in apocryphal accounts and records of esoteric schools. However, for the children of light, this gap was not an absence, but a preparation. They believed that during these years, the young Yeshua, as he was called, walked among the wise, among the guardians of ancient knowledge, among those who had prepared for his coming for centuries. He was welcomed not as a stranger, but as the fulfillment of an ancient promise, as one whose presence had been glimpsed in secret chants and silent visions of entire generations of initiates. The encounter between Jesus and the children of light was not an accident, nor an isolated event. It was the convergence point of a mission that had spanned generations, civilizations, and continents. When the young master appeared in regions near the desert, some Essene communities, isolated from urban centers, immediately recognized the vibrational field he radiated. There was no need for a formal announcement nor outward signs. The recognition was silent, instantaneous, as if the earth itself had whispered to its guardians, "He has arrived." It was not an intellectual recognition, but a spiritual one. It was like finally finding the central piece of a sacred puzzle whose edges had been assembled through centuries of preparation. Contrary to popular belief, Jesus did not begin his mission abruptly. According to oral traditions preserved in hidden schools, he underwent processes of purification and deep activation before he could fully manifest the Christ consciousness he carried. These processes were not imposed by external masters, but were carried out in sacred places, alongside beings who understood the delicacy of the task. The children of light knew that a human body, no matter how pure, needed subtle adjustments to withstand the impact of a cosmic consciousness. Therefore, they made available to the master their spaces of silence, their ancestral techniques, their energy balance practices, their secret texts. Jesus was not taught by them, but was welcomed, prepared, and enhanced. And in return, his presence activated even deeper levels of light and understanding in these initiates. There are indications in apocryphal texts and Eastern traditions that the young Yeshua may have also traveled to distant lands, such as Egypt, India, and even regions of Tibet, where he would have received teachings from equally ancient lineages. However, none of these encounters would have the same resonance as what occurred with the sons of light. This is because with them, there was no separation between teaching and presence. They were not seeking to form a master, but to recognize the one who was already born ready. And in recognizing him, they became not masters, but mirrors. The relationship that formed between Jesus and this fraternity was unique. He was the manifestation of what they had glimpsed in the invisible, and they were the silent guardians who would sustain the field for his public mission. It was a dance of spiritual love, of mutual recognition, of deep mutual reverence. During the periods when Jesus withdrew to the desert, he was not merely meditating or fasting. He was in communion with these beings. There are indirect records of some of the deepest encounters occurring in hidden caves near the Dead Sea, where the most sacred writings of the order were kept. In these encounters, there were no speeches, only energy exchanges, silent activations, consciousness transmissions. It was as if the walls of reality dissolved, and there, in that liminal space between worlds, the cosmic Christ could fully manifest, preparing to permanently inhabit the Master's body. This preparation was necessary because the density of the earth was, and still is, a significant obstacle to the continuous expression of divine consciousness. Only in prepared places, protected by high-vibration beings, was it possible to sustain this field without collapses. The influence of the Sons of Light did not end with the preparation of Jesus. During his public mission, especially in the early years, there is evidence that some members of this order discreetly accompanied him, keeping their distance, observing, praying, sustaining the energy field behind the scenes. They were not formal disciples, they were not among the 12, but they acted as anchoring points in strategic locations, like human antennas channeling the Christ frequency to denser regions. Some of them interacted with Jesus briefly, exchanging silent glances, recognizing each other without the need for words. Others remained hidden, aware that their role was not to appear, but to invisibly maintain the subtle thread of the ongoing mission. In the most critical moments of the Master's journey, the children of light intensified their protective practices. They knew that the planetary field would fiercely resist the Christic presence. They understood that the impact of Jesus' words, his healings, and his vision of absolute love would provoke intense reactions not only among men, but also in the subtle forces controlling the invisible power structures of the world. Therefore, in secret vigils, the initiates maintained the frequency of light in silence, like invisible spiritual pillars that prevented more severe vibrational collapses. They could not directly interfere with the course of the mission, but they could and should ensure that the integrity of the field was maintained as much as possible. They were the protectors of the invisible, the guardians of the divine flow in its purest form. Even after the crucifixion, the children of light did not disperse. On the contrary, they intensified their actions. They knew that the body had been destroyed, but the Christ consciousness would now spread like silent fire throughout the earth. Their mission then moved to another stage, to prepare hearts, sow light in remote places, discreetly form new communities of consciousness where the seed of Christ could germinate in silence. Some went to Egypt, others to Greece, some to regions of Europe, and others even to Eastern lands. They did not carry dogmas or doctrines with them, but the living vibration of the presence they had witnessed. Wherever they arrived, they planted silence, love, compassion, truth, and service. They continued the invisible mission of expanding Christ, not through words, but by frequency. The relationship between Jesus and the children of light, therefore, was never one of master and ordinary disciples. It was a brotherhood among awakened beings, each with their specific role within a larger plan. While Jesus publicly manifested the revelation, the children of light maintained, behind the scenes, the necessary spiritual support network to prevent the revelation from being destroyed by the world's reaction. They were invisible pillars bearing the vibrational weight of the divine incarnation. And for this reason, even after their withdrawal from the physical plane, they continued to operate, silently, for centuries, preserving what the world tried to distort, hide, and erase. These encounters between Christ and the Brotherhood are not mere historical episodes. They are living archetypes that continue to repeat themselves in other times, in other bodies, in other forms. In all evolutionary cycles, there are those who come first, prepare, recognize, and sustain. There are those who embody the word, and there are those who spread it in silence. Today, as in the past, these encounters continue to happen. And those who feel them, even without rationally understanding, recognize in them the same vibration of the eternal Christ. The light does not need to be named to be felt. And this is what the children of light have always known. The story of Jesus among the children of light is not told in the canonical Gospels. It is written in another language, the language of frequency, of inner memory, of the silent call that awakens ready hearts. And it is through this language that we follow, delving ever deeper into the backstage of the divine mission that is still underway, still expanding, still waiting for those who dare to remember. For Christ walks among us again, and the children of light are once again awakening. With the passing of the centuries and the relentless advance of social and religious structures seeking to dominate the course of human spirituality, the children of light understood that their visible presence in the physical world would become unsustainable. The density of the collective consciousness, now increasingly entangled in the bonds of power, control, and ideological manipulation, began to generate a hostile environment to the elevated vibrations that this fraternity upheld with discipline and humility. The world had witnessed the pinnacle of the Christic manifestation on earth, but instead of receiving this gift with reverence and transformation, many interpreted it as a threat. The institutional impulse to control the uncontrollable began to crush everything that was spontaneous, sacred, and free. And so, gradually, the children of light began to dissolve from the visible scene of the world, not out of weakness, but out of strategic wisdom. Their withdrawal was not a defeat, but a silent mutation. The formal dissolution of the order did not mean its disappearance. She understood that its continuity would only be possible in a new format, invisible to the world's eyes, camouflaged within other cultural expressions, disguised under common garments, concealing its presence under multiple names, languages, and traditions. They dispersed, like seeds carried by the wind, carrying with them the fragments of sacred knowledge, the vibrational codes, the maps to return to the light. Many of them assumed new identities, infiltrating philosophy schools, small monasteries, mystical orders of the East and West. Others remained nomadic, living as wanderers, anonymous sages who crossed lands and borders, transmitting the flame through the gaze, the gesture, the simple presence. There are unofficial records indicating the presence of direct descendants of the order in centers as diverse as Alexandria, the Sinai Desert, Tibet, Kashmir, the Caucasus, and even in remote parts of North Africa and Central Europe. These centers became small hubs for preserving ancient knowledge, often mixed with local traditions as a form of protection. Knowledge was no longer transmitted in large assemblies or through formal texts, but from heart to heart, in an almost imperceptible flow that preserved the integrity of the original frequency. The children of light had understood that the true spiritual heritage is not kept in temples or books, but in the living memory of the awakened soul. Thus, their presence began to inhabit the invisible, where no authority could reach them, where no earthly power could desecrate them. During the rise of the Roman Empire and the consolidation of institutionalized Christianity, much of the original legacy of the Brotherhood was systematically hidden, destroyed, or reinterpreted. The official doctrines required control, linearity, and authority. The figure of Jesus was transformed into a symbol of submission and sacrifice, his cosmic mission reduced to a politically useful moral story. The vibrational language of the sons of light was erased from the texts, their symbols demonized, their spiritualized practices converted into rituals emptied of meaning. Yet, none of this destroyed them, for their true existence was not tied to form, but to essence. And the essence, once anchored in the world, can never be eradicated. It was during this period that secret and discreet orders emerged, such as the true Gnostics, the first Sufis, some branches of Hermeticism, and later certain Templar and Rosicrucian orders, all influenced, directly or indirectly, by fragments of knowledge from the ancient Brotherhood. Each of these movements carried, to varying degrees, aspects of the ancient wisdom. Some preserved the thread of esoteric knowledge, others the purity of the heart as the path, and still others maintained the coded symbols of the original mission. The dispersion of the Order of the Sons of Light, therefore, initiated a process of sacred fragmentation. The body disappeared, but the organs lived in other hosts, ensuring that the mission would never be interrupted. The Order, in its original form, ceased to exist as an institution, but it survived as a frequency that can be recognized by those who awaken the inner call. It came to inhabit the subtle field of the earth, like an invisible network of incarnated souls who, without ever physically knowing each other, operate in a synchronized manner, like cells of a single spiritual organism. In each era, this network manifests differently, adapting to languages, cultures, and contexts, but always preserving its silent essence, to be a channel of light amid darkness, to be a bridge between heaven and earth, to be a living witness of the Christic presence that never departed. Many of those who today feel displaced from the world, who feel an inexplicable call to seek something they can't yet name, are, in fact, touching the edge of this frequency. They are hearing, albeit faintly, the echo of the ancestral voice of the Brotherhood. It doesn't matter where they are, nor what their religion, culture, or origin is. The call doesn't recognize titles, nor external merits. It operates on vibration, and when it finds resonance in a soul, it activates the forgotten memory, reignites the inner light, and leads the individual on a new path. Not an external path, but a journey inward, towards the reconnection with a greater purpose. That's why the children of light have never tried to restore their order in its original form. They knew that times had changed, that visible structures were doomed to corruption and deviation. Therefore, their new action began to occur on multiple fronts, often without conscious connection between them, but united by the same impulse: the return of divine consciousness to human experience. Their representatives became artists, healers, educators, mystics, scientists, therapists, keepers of indigenous wisdom, and even ordinary people living in silence, but whose simple presence alters the field around them. The light continues to be transmitted, but now in new formats, by new hands, in new languages. The dispersion of the order was therefore not a fall, but a metamorphosis. It adapted to new times, new densities, new demands. It became liquid, intangible, yet still present, invisible, but absolutely real. And in each cycle of collective awakening, it reappears with new garments, new missions, new ways of operating. What's important is not the name it carries, nor the symbol it adopts, but the frequency it maintains. This frequency is the living legacy of the Brotherhood, and any being that recognizes it in themselves, even unknowingly, is, in a way, connected to this lineage. The hidden legacy of the children of light remains as an underground current that runs through history. It is not taught in schools, not celebrated in festivals, not recognized by authorities, but it is felt in hearts that yearn for truth, for inner freedom, for connection with something greater. And it is in these hearts that the order remains alive. The Christ they help to manifest has never withdrawn from the world. He continues here, waiting for eyes capable of seeing him, for hands willing to serve, for brave souls enough to embody his light. And the children of light, now scattered, continue preparing for this reunion, because the mission has not ended, it has only changed in form. Even under the weight of millennia of forgetfulness, repression, and distortion, the seed planted by the children of light has never ceased to pulsate. This seed is, in fact, a dormant vibration within the human being, a pre-verbal remembrance of divine origin, an intact fragment of the one consciousness that survived the falls, pains, and illusions of the world. To this vibration, the ancients gave many names: divine spark, Christic spark, light of the spirit. But regardless of the language, it pointed to the same unchanging core. The children of light understood that this essential consciousness had been covered by layers of fear, conditioning, and spiritual amnesia. They knew that humanity's task was not to acquire something new, but to remember what had been forgotten. The wisdom of the chosen ones was not superiority, but memory. And this memory is now beginning to return. This return does not occur as a sudden avalanche, but as the gradual awakening of a flower that re-emerges after long winter nights. It manifests itself in the form of unexplainable intuitions, profound questions that arise without apparent cause, sudden emotions in the face of truths that have never been heard, but that, once spoken, seem immediately familiar. This familiarity does not come from the intellect, but from the soul. It is the echo of a truth that is being recognized, not learned. The lost consciousness begins to emerge not through effort, but through resonance. The silent vibration that the children of light anchored thousands of years ago begins to find compatible receptors, beings who, although immersed in modern realities, feel an undeniable call to something greater, truer, brighter. These chosen ones, contrary to what many believe, are not selected based on merit, purity, or exemplary behavior. They are called by vibration. They are those whose energy fields begin to align with the original truth. They can be found anywhere, in large urban centers or remote villages, in traditional families or in contexts of disruption, in ancient religions or outside of any spiritual structure. The common characteristic among them is a thirst for something they cannot find in the external world, a longing for something they have never experienced in this life, but feel as true. This longing is the sign of the return of lost consciousness, It is the invisible thread that reconnects them to the lineage of those who have never ceased to serve the light. The process of reactivating this wisdom is often disconcerting. It does not follow the patterns of human logic, does not obey schedules, does not respect expectations. It can start with deep pain, an existential crisis, a rupture that disrupts everything that previously seemed stable. The collapse of the former structure is, in fact, the beginning of an opening to something more real. The ancients knew that the spirit only enters where there is space. And for this space to be created, it is often necessary for the false to unravel. Therefore, those who are awakening may go through long periods of apparent darkness, where nothing makes sense, where the world seems hostile or empty. These periods are, in fact, the silent preparation for the return of light. The wisdom of the chosen ones initially manifests as subtle perception. They begin to sense what others don't yet see. They intuit truths hidden beneath common words. They recognize energy manipulations, falsehoods disguised as spirituality, hidden intentions behind beautiful speeches. They develop a keen sensitivity that, although it may be uncomfortable at first, over time becomes an internal beacon guiding their steps. This sensitivity is not a weakness, but fine-tuning. The initiate begins to operate as a sacred instrument, adjusting their vibration with every choice, every contact, every word spoken. They live in constant harmony with the light that pulses behind the form, even if the outside world is still immersed in shadow. As this awareness returns, the ancient codes of fraternity begin to spontaneously manifest in the chosen ones. They start to value silence, seek simplicity, distance themselves from excess, respect natural rhythms, listen more than they speak, feel more than they analyze. Even without knowing, they are reclaiming the foundations of initiatory life. They rediscover the power of the gaze, the strength of presence, the magnetism of a coherent heart. They feel compelled to study profound spiritual themes, to meditate, to take care of their diet, to purify their thoughts, to serve without expecting a return. Not because someone taught them, but because something within them guides them. It's the spiritual memory reactivating. It's the cosmic DNA reorganizing according to the original vibration. Many of these chosen ones face loneliness, misunderstanding, and internal conflicts. They feel torn between the world they know and the call they don't know how to answer. This division is part of the process. It's the transition between the old and the new, between conditioning and freedom. The children of light also went through this. They too were misunderstood, rejected, persecuted. But they remained steadfast because they knew they were not alone. They were connected by an invisible network, an egregore of light that sustained them even in the darkest moments. This same network is once again activating, and every new being that awakens further strengthens this collective field, this spiritual organism that pulses beyond the boundaries of time. The return of lost consciousness is not an event, but a collective process that is already underway. It does not depend on leaders, nor on organized movements. It relies solely on hearts willing to remember, to relearn the language of light, to abandon masks and return to the essence. Christ, as a field of consciousness, is once again approaching the surface of the world, and those who hear his inner call will be, as before, the new children of light, not by title, but by vibration. They will not have a uniform, they will not have a physical headquarters, they will not form sects. They will be points of light in everyday life, acting with love, compassion, clarity, and firmness. They will be healers, silent teachers, builders of the new era. The wisdom of the chosen ones is silent, yet firm. It's humble, yet powerful. It's invisible, yet it transforms everything around it. They do not seek to convince, but to resonate. They do not aim to dominate, but to serve. They do not strive to be special, but to be integral. Their greatness lies in the coherence between what they feel, think, and do. And this coherence by itself is capable of healing, awakening, dissolving illusions, and opening paths. They don't need to say who they are, because their presence speaks. They don't need to defend themselves, because the light they uphold protects them. They don't need to prove anything, because their life becomes testimony. This is the true return of lost consciousness, when the spirit fully inhabits the body again, when the soul expresses itself without filters, when the human being becomes once again a temple of the divine. Today, more than ever, this return is urgent. The world cries out for truth, for clarity, for real love. And the ancient children of light, in their new garb, are ready to answer this call. They will not come from the stages, nor from the power domes. They will come from silence, from the margins, from simple hearts, from pure gestures. They will bring not a new religion, but a new vibration, not a new doctrine, but a new way of being. And when enough beings awaken this consciousness, the world will know once again the light that never went out. The times we are living in now are not ordinary. There is a palpable acceleration at all levels of human existence, an internal pressure that intensifies with each cycle, as if something grand was about to emerge irreversibly. Science perceives climatic disorder, philosophy observes the bankruptcy of traditional values, politics unveils its moral collapse, and spirituality, in turn, feels the call of the invisible, the return of an ancient presence that is approaching. These are the last days, not in the vulgarized apocalyptic sense, but as the culmination of a long cycle of spiritual disconnection. It is the end of the night for those who wish to see the dawn. At this crucial moment, the Brotherhood of the Sons of Light re-emerges in a new form, with a new mission adapted to modern density, but fueled by the same unchanging essence. The light is called upon again, not just to be seen, but to be lived. The new mission does not aim to restore old traditions, nor to revive forgotten liturgies. It does not seek to rebuild stone temples or re-establish sacred hierarchies. On the contrary, its focus is on reconstructing the inner temple, on activating the divine presence in every being willing to remember who they are. The fraternity of our times is fluid, decentralized, devoid of visible symbols. It does not depend on public recognition, nor on institutional authorization. Its strength lies in invisibility. It lives between the lines, in the silent intervals, in the moments when someone chooses love over fear, truth over convenience, compassion over indifference. Every conscious gesture now becomes a ritual act, every mindful breath a mantra, every deep gaze a silent prayer. The children of light in these last days will not be recognized by their clothes or speeches, but by the vibration they emit, by the field of peace they carry, by the wisdom that springs from their actions, by the ability to navigate through chaos without losing their center. They will be present where least expected, among doctors and artists, teachers and scientists, farmers and therapists, mothers, children, elders, and young people. They will not form closed groups, but living networks of silent support, of intuitive connection, of energetic cooperation. They will sense each other by the resonance of the heart, and even without ever physically meeting, they will know that they are united by the same sacred mission: to sustain the light in a world in deep transition, and to sow consciousness in a soil that has long forgotten what it is to awaken. Unlike past cycles, this new mission unfolds in a world saturated with information, yet starved of wisdom. Humanity is overwhelmed with stimuli, distractions, and fragmented narratives. Therefore, the new Brotherhood operates not through argumentation, but through frequency. They will not attempt to convince, but to transform through the vibrational field. Their presence will be the proof. Their consistency will be the teaching. Their serenity will be the invitation. They will be discreet lights in a world full of spotlights. And while the noises of the old world multiply, these silent lights will continue to glow, holding the space where the new can be born. The Earth's energy field is undergoing a profound reconfiguration. Everything that does not resonate with truth is being exposed, undone, revealed. Old structures are crumbling. Systems once deemed unshakable are being dismantled. Nothing founded on illusion will stand. This apparent collapse, despite the suffering it may generate, is an essential part of the transition. And it is precisely in this scenario that the new mission of the Children of Light becomes vital. They did not come to prevent the collapse, but to accompany the birth. They are midwives of the new consciousness. Their task is not to avoid pain, but to sustain the field so that it is fertile, not destructive. They are bearers of hope that does not deceive, but illuminates. Guardians of the silence that heals. facilitators of the truth that liberates. The preparation for this mission begins deep within each being. There are no maps nor recipes. Each one will be guided by their own listening, by their own fidelity to what they feel is true. This requires courage. The courage to not follow the crowd, to question the established, to endure the loneliness of the journey, to abandon the masks, to live with absolute integrity. The new children of light will not need to know everything. They will only need to stay aligned with their essence, and this in itself will make them channels of the new, because when a being aligns with what is purest within them, they become a beacon, and a beacon does not need to speak. It just stays lit, and that is enough to guide those who are still in the dark. Many will feel this calling without understanding where it comes from. They will feel discomfort with the life they lead, unrest with traditional paths, repulsion towards rigid structures, and an inexplicable attraction to that which vibrates with authenticity. They won't be wrong. They will be hearing the silent summons of the new brotherhood. Perhaps they won't know how to put it into words. Maybe they'll try to deny it. But the vibration is insistent. It pulses in the cells, burns in the chest, shines in the eyes. And the more one tries to ignore it, the more it intensifies, because it doesn't come from outside. It comes from the origin. And everything that comes from the origin never silences. It's the call back to the inner home. It's the announcement that the time to remember has come. The return of the Brotherhood is, therefore, the return of the human being to himself. The mission of the last days is to embody light amidst the shadow, to be the Christ in silent action, to live with clarity in times of deceit, to care for the soul while the world tends to the ego, to love even without being loved, to serve even without recognition, to persist even without assurances, and to do all this with joy, with humility, with surrender. This is the new mission, not as an obligation, but as a spontaneous expression of those who remember why they came to earth. Each conscious act will be a seed, each truthful word an arrow of light, each pure gesture an open door to the new era. Behind the scenes of this planetary transition, the ancient masters of the Brotherhood continue to observe, guide, inspire, not with words, but with energy, not with promises, but with presence. They are among us, on subtle planes, like elder siblings, like compassionate consciousnesses that watch over each soul that decides to align with the truth. They do not impose, they do not interfere, they do not force. They simply wait for the silent yes of the awakened heart. And when that yes happens, something opens, a bridge is formed, and the old and the new meet again at the center of being. The light that has always been there ignites, and the mission begins again with new names, new voices, new forms, but with the same eternal essence. The approaching future will not be built by charismatic leaders, nor by reformed institutions. It will be woven by anonymous beings, awakened, rooted in the heart, by those who choose peace even when they could choose anger, who choose to listen even when they could impose, who choose to serve even when they could hide. These will be the true architects of the new era. They will carry within them the memory of brotherhood, not because they studied it, but because they are it, because it lives within them, like a seed that now blossoms, like a mission that now reveals itself, like a light that now shines again. And so, the children of light fulfill their most important cycle, not to prepare the world to receive the light anymore, but to reveal to the world that the light is already here, and that it lives in every being who decides to remember. And now, Mind Unfettered. Tell me in the comments, do you feel that you are also a reincarnated son or daughter of light in this time of transition? Share with us the moment in your life when you began to feel this silent call for something greater. Your experience could be the spark that awakens another dormant member of this vast network of awakened consciousness. We are manifesting this light together, step by step, word by word, heart by heart. And if this journey has stirred something deep within you, don't stop now. The next step is already calling you. Watch the video, The Book of 33 Steps, the hidden map Jesus left for enlightenment, where we reveal the hidden codes left by Christ himself for you to follow the path of true enlightenment. We're just getting started. We are the minds unfettered, and we're awakening.